Awesome. So I appreciate you being here again, and congratulations again for taking some time out of your what I'm sure is a very busy week for you to work on yourself and your workday. So this week I want to dive right in and talk about planning, and specifically how our mindset and the way that we think about planning can really get in the way of us making some positive, impactful, big changes to our workday and also to our career. So a quick reminder that as we move through the episode today, if you have a question, you can submit it by clicking on the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Or if you want to ask a question live, we have a small group today, so just go ahead and let me know that you want to ask it live. We've set this up so that we could see one another's faces and have this feel like more of a discussion. So I'm seeing a lot of the same faces each week, which is awesome. So if you feel like you want to ask your question out loud in front of the group, please go ahead and do that. So let's dive right in. So I work a lot with entrepreneurs and professionals on how to change their workday and really how to change the direction of their life. And anytime I work with a really large group or with individuals, there's always an aspect of planning that's involved, right? We've all been exposed to lots of messaging over the years about how planning is critical when it comes to making any kind of changes that you want to see. Over the years, I've been someone who has loved making plans, like I'm sure many of you do, whether that's in the form of lists or action plans or business plans or plans about how you're going to spend your day. We love plans because at the outset, when we create them in this vacuum, sort of in our head, they help us to trace a direct line from where we are now to where we want to go, right? There's this major sense of comfort and clarity that comes with knowing and believing that step A is going to lead to step B, which is going to lead to step C. So in other words, when you make a plan, you're really creating this clear image of a path forward, and there's a lot of comfort in that. And at that point, when you're making that plan, the path forward is clear, the goal is clear, and our brain sort of automatically assumes that all we need to do is just follow the path and it will lead to achievement of whatever goal is at the end of the path. But inevitably, as soon as we start to take action and as soon as we set the plan in motion, the plan becomes useless almost as soon as we start, right? And the reason that the plan becomes useless is because when we take action, we either encounter some sort of friction point, right, that we couldn't have accounted for at the outset, or we learn a new piece of information that influences and changes the nature of the plan, right? So we learn something, or we have a shift in mindset, or we encounter an obstacle that interrupts that very clear vision of the path forward that we had. And this is the point where we get stuck. We thought that we had this very clear path forward, and we thought we had already answered the question of how we were going to get there. And what happens next is really the biggest mistake that I think we make when it comes to making plans. When we encounter that friction point and that resistance, we mistake and confuse our inability to map out the exact steps with the value of our idea. So when that friction point happens, we confuse our inability to map out the next steps with the value of our idea. So in other words, we think that our inability to understand the steps toward our next goal mean that maybe our goal isn't that good or it's not achievable, right? Looking back at my own life, I can't tell you how often, especially early on in my career, I abandoned a great idea that was filled with inspiration right out of the gate, because as soon as I went about trying to set my plan into motion, I encountered some sort of resistance and some friction that I hadn't accounted for. And then I went immediately from having this very clear vision of the path to one that was no longer clear. And what happens when we can't see the entire path forward is we get scared, right? And we get anxious because we love certainty. We want answers to all of the questions that we have about how's it going to work? When's it going to happen? Who's involved? What's it going to take us to get there, right? And we want those questions, the answers to those questions right now. Our minds want that certainty, and we want to be able to understand everything before we move forward because we're trying to protect ourselves, right? We're not comfortable with the unknown. And when we don't know the answers, our mind sort of sounds the alarm, right? And it wants to pull the chute on whatever really great idea that it was that we had. We also tend to start beating up on ourselves immediately because the plan we made isn't working, and we can't figure out all the exact steps that it will take us to get there, right? So we start to tell ourselves a story like, you know what? If I'm encountering this much friction and this much resistance already, that must mean that this was not such a good idea after all. And I can tell you from having worked with hundreds of people on how to make plans for their workday and their career, in my view, this initial disruption of the clear path that we envisioned is one of the key reasons why we don't make plans and why we abandon the goals that we set for ourselves altogether. So if this is a major mindset obstacle for us, how do we start to address it? Well, this is really where the title of this episode comes into play. There's a great quote that's attributed to Dwight Eisenhower, and the quote goes something like this: "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." So what does that mean? If you think about what it takes for something to go from an idea to an actual end result, it's really impossible to account for all of the variables that will come along the way, right? That will play out along the way. It's almost impossible to map something step by step with this really pinpoint accuracy without some sort of deviation. So when we make a plan, we have to acknowledge from the outset that the plan as we have outlined it and as we sit here today is probably going to change. And not probably, it will change. We have to get comfortable with the fact that we don't have all the information we need to accomplish the end goal, and that there naturally will be some uncertainty as we move forward. We have to stop thinking that when we can't see the entire path forward, that doesn't mean that our idea is bad or unworthy of pursuing. It just means that we don't have enough information yet. So it doesn't mean that we can't do it. It just means that we haven't learned how to do it yet. That's it. That's as simple as it is. So what we need to do is just separate ourselves from viewing our inability to comply with the plan as a failure. Sometimes we say, I haven't followed the plan step by step. I've already failed. And that's just not the case. And this is where I think the genius of this quote comes into play. It's not about following the plan point by point. The plan is not the prize. It's the act of planning that is the most valuable part of the process. When you take the time to plan, right, it forces you to map out and think through what it is that you want, right? It helps you to define the destination. It helps to solidify your purpose for undertaking this particular journey in the first place, right? It helps you to identify potential roadblocks, and just the mere act of planning helps you to start churning that idea mill. So the true value is really in the act of planning and not the plan itself. So if that's the case, then the question becomes, how do we become better at planning and adapting and moving through all of this uncertainty so that we can achieve the end goal that we had in mind? The answer to this is through taking action. It's only through taking action that we end up gathering the information that we need to make it to the very next step, right? We can sit in a room and we can try to strategize all day about how we want to change our workday, how we want to improve our business, how we want to change our career, but none of that really matters until we actually go about taking the actions themselves. Every time you take an action, you acquire new information that you can use to choose the very next step. So this is information that you never would have learned, never, had you not taken that preceding action, right? It's the kind of information that only comes from taking action. So I want to just give you kind of a visual that I really like for this as a starting point. So I want you to imagine that you're hiking in the mountains. And what you're trying to do is get to a hilltop that you can see that's several miles off in the distance. And in between you and this hilltop is a very thick, densely wooded forest. And it's so dense that you can't really see any kind of path from where you're standing right now to the hilltop that you want to get to. All you can really see is a couple of feet in front of you, and it's just a bunch of trees and bushes that are all in your line of vision. Now, if you've ever been on a hike like this before, what happens when you take a couple of steps forward? Every time you take a step forward, you open up this new field of vision, right? You move past a few of the things that were blocking your line of sight initially, trees, bushes, whatever, and now you have a very different perspective. You basically acquire a new set of information and a new set of data points that allow you to view the next few steps in a different light and see that hilltop that you're moving toward with more clarity. And of course, this viewpoint and this information is something that you never would have uncovered or known had you not taken those first steps. So with a lot of the things we do, this is the true nature of how we accomplish goals, right? It's a series of mini planning sessions that are conducted every time we encounter new information. Sometimes the new information will change the plan, sometimes it won't, but we have to be open and accepting of that process. And the more accepting we are of that process, the easier it will be to not only process that new information, but also engage in even better planning, because we've removed our desire to know the answer to every single question when we start, right? We're much better equipped to just engage in the process and learn as we go. So with this in mind, I want to leave you with an actionable takeaway, like I try to do it at the end of each of these. I think you can easily apply this analogy that I just laid out to your career path, to growing your business, or to changing your workday. When you go about mapping out a vision for a change that you want to make, maybe you want to switch careers, start a new business, change your routines. If you get started and the plan you made immediately becomes obsolete, right? Or if you're getting bogged down in the details and you're feeling that friction, which I know all of us feel when we're trying to make changes, I want you to remember that that's a natural part of this process, and that it's time for you to take the new information that you have learned and engage in another round of planning. So if this is happening to you, I want you to take these 3 steps. Just so we can work with an example, let's say that the goal I have is to create a side business that I have some interest in, right? I have a 9-to-5, but I want to start an online business on the side, right? Just as an example. So originally I had this really big burst of enthusiasm. I made a plan, but now I've started to research it and I'm starting to feel a little discouraged or I'm stuck. So how would I work through this? Step 1 would just be to spend more time concentrating on the vision that you have for the change that you want to see. If you want to make a change, you have to always hold that end ideal at the forefront of your mind, right? When we keep an outcome that we want at the forefront of our mind, then we have this clear picture of the change that we want to see. And that desire ends up seeping into our day-to-day thoughts that we have. And it helps to really imprint those thoughts onto our brain. And then it helps us to see opportunity differently. So when I move through my day focused on the change I want to see, what you realize is that a lot of times the answers are right in front of you, right? They're actually all around you, but you're just not paying close enough attention to realize that they're there. So in my example, maybe something I'll do is, I'm going to wake up every morning thinking about how awesome it would be to have this new business, right? The financial freedom it would give me, maybe it would stimulate an intellectual curiosity that I have, and I'm going to keep that top of mind. Step 2 would be just to ask this question: what's at the root of the friction that I'm experiencing? So in other words, instead of just realizing that there's a roadblock and becoming anxious or frustrated about it, let's spend some actual time applying a critical eye to the why part. So here's a couple of reasons, in my experience, why we get tripped up. Is it because you need more information? Is it because you have a limiting belief that's telling you that you can't do it? That's a big one. Is it because you're not talking to the right people? So a big part of making changes is talking to people who have actually made the changes that we want to make. So we might share an idea with someone that we know, but they might not give us the kind of advice that we need because they've never done what it is that we want to do before. So they might give us some advice that may conflict with what we want to do. Maybe it's because you haven't given it enough time just to work or to take shape, or maybe it's something that you actually don't want. Maybe the thing that you wanted isn't what you want at all, and you're ready to move on to something else. That's okay. But in this step, what I want you to do is really nail down where that friction is coming from. And as always, I suggest that you take the time to write it out on paper. Really helpful exercise. Okay, third and finally, step 3, what's the very next single action that I can take that will move me closer to my goal or give me more information? Here, we're not trying to get too wrapped up in the 10-point plan that we made or all the things we could do and be paralyzed by overanalyzing it. I want you to focus on just one action that you can take that will help move you closer to that hilltop that we talked about. We're trying to get more information so that we can use it to unstick ourselves and move past this blockage that we're experiencing. So in my example, it might be maybe looking for an online course or a coach who can teach me how to start a business. Maybe I want to read some personal development books that help me, move through my doubt and uncertainty about, my self-worth or my ability to actually do this. Or maybe I could speak with someone who's actually started a business and see what their advice is, right? So the point here is to not be paralyzed by too much thought and to really put action at the center of the discovery process. So those are the 3 steps. Step 1, concentrate on the vision. Step 2, what's at the root of the friction that I'm feeling? And then step 3 is to take 1 action step, not 2 or 3, but just focus on the next one that I can take. Okay, let's spend some time taking questions if you have any. I know that this is a big challenge. A lot of people experience, if you want to break it down into day-to-day goals that you set for yourself, this sort of thing where we get really tripped up on overthinking it, or thinking that when we come across friction, right, that this wasn't really such a good idea after all. This is something that comes up in your day-to-day. So as you move forward this week, I would encourage you to look for some of those friction points and move through this 3-part process to help resolve them. All right. Seeing no questions, we will leave it there for today. Thanks again for joining, everyone. Would love to connect with you and get your help spreading the word about this series. So as always, if you could share with a friend or give us a shout out on social media, that would be awesome. I'd really appreciate it. I've already connected with many of you already on LinkedIn, which is fantastic. I've got our tags here at the bottom of the screen. So let's connect on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, any of the above. Our next episode is next Monday at the same time. I will see you then. Go have a great work day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
You're welcome.